The Great Hall of Vareth stood as a monument to unity, or so the Concord claimed. Its crystal dome stretched high into the heavens, refracting the glow of the twin moons into violet and silver hues that bathed the floor in shifting light. The structure itself was older than most empires. It's built in an era when the galaxy first dared to imagine peace across countless species. Now it served a singular purpose: to host the ritual of binding, a ceremony where partners were chosen, alliances were sealed, and destiny supposedly revealed itself through the flow of ancient energies. That night, the hall brimmed with life. Hundreds of delegates had arrived, dressed in ceremonial garb that glittered like constellations. The insectoid monarchs of Calath clicked their jeweled wings in anticipation. The crystalline scholars of Elis shimmered as light refracted through their faceted bodies. Even the reptilian warlords of Guard stood in gleaming ceremonial armor, scales burnished to perfection. Laughter, whispers, pride filled the air as beings prepared for the ritual. Each participant knew what awaited, a bond chosen not by politics or ambition, but by the will of the ritual itself. Pairs would form as luminous threads of energy pulled the beings together, sealing their fates. It was an honor to be chosen, and a humiliation to be left behind. And yet, in all the magnificence, one figure remained shrouded in silence. At the far end of the hall, apart from the throngs of hopefuls, stood the alien vampire queen. She was impossible to miss, though most tried not to look directly at her. Draped in flowing obsidian silks that seemed to drink the very light around her, she stood taller than most, her figure carved with regal poise. Her skin, pale as frost beneath starlight, glowed faintly, an eerie reminder of the power that flowed within her. And her eyes, deep crimson, burning with a predator's hunger, swept the hall with an intensity that made even the bravest avert there. Gazed out, her name was Sereneth of the Thaldron, the last living ruler of her bloodline. Once her people had been feared across the stars, whispered of as shadows that drank the life force of others. But in recent centuries, the galaxy had turned against them. Feeding restrictions imposed by the Concord left her kind starving. Whole clans withered away, leaving Sereneth to reign over a dwindling empire on the brink of collapse. Even here, in the supposed Temple of Unity, she was an outcast. Whispers filled the hall as eyes flicked toward her, only to dart away again. Who would dare bind with her? Murmured one crystalline envoy, voice ringing like broken glass. She is hunger incarnate, hissed a Calath noble, antennae twitching with unease. To touch her is to offer your veins willingly, muttered a guard warlord, sneering behind his fangs. Sereneth heard them all. She always did. Her senses, sharpened over centuries, picked up the smallest breath, the faintest heartbeat. But she gave no sign of irritation. She stood with her chin high, her silks cascading like liquid night, as though the whispers did not cut into her as sharply as blades. The ritual began. From the floor rose glowing lines of power. Weaving through the hall like rivers of starlight, each participant felt the pull an invisible thread drawing them toward another. Crystalline scholars drifted toward insectoid monarchs, their energies aligning. Reptilian warlords clasped hands with scaled nobles of distant colonies, their union marked by the clash of armor. Laughter, joy, and triumph rippled through the crowd as one by one bonds were formed. Alien hands found alien claws. Fragile, luminescent beings embraced hardened warriors. Even rivals were joined by the ritual's decree, their protests drowned by the inevitability of destiny's choice. All except one. Sereneth stood, still as a statue carved from midnight as the last lines of energy faded. None had been drawn to her. None had dared. A hush fell across the hall as the truth settled. The alien vampire queen remained unchosen. A cruel satisfaction glimmered in the eyes of many. For centuries, they had feared her power, reviled her kind. Now the ritual itself, ancient and sacred, seemed to confirm their belief that she was cursed, unworthy, destined to stand alone. And yet, not everyone had moved on. At the farthest edge of the hall, near the pillars carved with ancient runes, one figure remained unmoving. A man broad-shouldered, but unadorned compared to the others, watched with calm eyes. His presence had been overlooked in the grandeur of the gathering. his simple black uniform dwarfed by the finery of alien lords. He was human, while others filed out. Whispering of serenest shame, he stayed rooted in place. He did not flinch under her crimson gaze. He did not turn away in fear. Instead, as the silence of her rejection thickened around her, he began to walk forward. Every step echoed against the crystalline floor, and for the first time in centuries, the alien vampire queen felt something stir within her chest. Not hunger, not rage, something far more dangerous, Marcus. Hale had always been an oddity among Terrans, where most of his people rushed headlong into danger with brash confidence. Marcus carried himself with a quieter kind of courage, the sort born not of arrogance, but of conviction. He was no diplomat of renown, no decorated war hero, merely an envoy soldier assigned to represent Earth at the gathering of the chosen. Humanity's place in the Concord was still tenuous, and their delegation small, yet wherever Terrans went, stories followed, tales of resilience, of adaptability, of an unwillingness to bow even to the oldest of empires. He had stood at the back of the hall throughout the ritual, his expression unreadable, his dark eyes studying rather than celebrating. He watched as the threads of destiny entwined alien with alien, sealing partnerships and alliances that would ripple through the galaxy for decades to come. And he had noticed keenly, sharply, the woman left behind, Sarah Knight, the alien vampire. We could feel the shift in the room when it became obvious she had not been chosen. The way whispers grew sharper, crueler. The way eyes darted to her with smug satisfaction before quickly looking away again, as though she might devour them for their insolence. Marcus saw something else. She stood like a queen. Yes, poised, composed, her back straight as though centuries of rejection had not bowed her spine. But her eyes, crimson pools of restrained hunger, betrayed her. Beneath the glacial mask was not merely fury, but solitude. The kind of solitude that hollowed rather than hardened. When the ritual ended and the glowing threads faded, the hall erupted in chatter. Pairs celebrated their unions, laughter and music rising like waves. The vampire queen remained still, a dark island in a sea of revelry. Most pretended not to see her. Others relished her isolation. Marcus did not move toward the doors. Instead, he inhaled deeply, squared his shoulders, and began to walk. The sound of his boots striking the crystalline floor echoed in the cavernous chamber. Conversations faltered. Heads turned. The insectoid monarchs clicked uneasily. The crystalline scholars flickered dimmer in confusion. Even the reptilian warlords paused their boasting to watch. A human. Approaching her? Saranath tilted her head, her silks whispering as she turned fully to face him. Her gaze was sharp enough to pierce armor, her presence so cold it could have frozen blood. Yet Marcus kept walking, steady and unhurried, as though he approached not a predator, but an equal. When he stood before her, silence gripped the hall, her lips curved. Not into a smile, but something closer to curiosity. "Human," she said, her voice like velvet over steel, smooth yet edged. "The ritual did not summon you to me." Her words were truth. The ancient threads of destiny had ignored her. By all laws and customs, his approach was meaningless. And yet Marcus's dark eyes never wavered. "No," he admitted softly. "It didn't, but it didn't forbid me either." The room rippled with murmurs. "He defies the ritual. Foolish ape. He doesn't understand what she is. He courts death itself." But Marcus ignored them. He extended his hand not in challenge, not in fear, but in offering. The gesture was so simple, so human, and yet it struck the hall like thunder. For centuries, none had dared approach her. None had treated her as more than a monster cloaked in silks. Now, before the entire Concord, a fragile mortal dared to reach for her hand as though she were not a curse, but a woman left standing alone. Serenus's crimson eyes widened fractionally, betraying the smallest crack in her mask. "You would bind yourself to me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, "knowing what I am." Her fangs glinted as she spoke, the reminder of her nature sharp and unavoidable. She was predator incarnate, hunger clothed in beauty, To touch her was to invite danger. To remain with her was to live at the edge of death itself. But Marcus did not flinch. His hand remained outstretched, steady as stone. "I know," he said simply. "But everyone else saw danger? I saw someone left standing alone for the first time in centuries." The great hall was truly silent. The insectoid monarchs stopped clicking. The crystalline scholars dimmed entirely. Even the reptilian warlords who had mocked her moments earlier held their breath. All eyes were locked on the human whose voice did not quake, whose hand did not tremble, whose courage came not from ignorance, but from choice and in the silence. Something stirred within Seroneth's chest. It was not hunger, though his heartbeat thundered in her ears. Rich and intoxicating, it was something older, something deeper, something she thought long buried, a flicker of hope. The hall held its breath. Hundreds of eyes belonging to species across the Concord remained locked on the unlikely scene before them. A human stood where none dared to stand, his hand extended toward the most feared being in the chamber. The air felt heavier, as if the crystal dome itself was pressing down. Waiting to see what would happen next, Sarah Neith, the alien vampire queen, stared at Marcus Hale with eyes that glowed faintly crimson under the shifting light. Her silks rustled like whispers as she tilted her head, regarding his steady hand. No one had ever offered such a gesture to her. Not in centuries. Not since the galaxy had decided she was better left untouchable. Her voice was soft, but every syllable carried the weight of centuries. "Do you understand, human? My kind feeds on life itself. To touch me is to invite hunger. To stay with me is to risk everything." Her words weren't threat alone, they were warning, an unspoken plea that he'd reconsider before it was too late. Marcus's expression didn't falter. His gaze remained calm, his hand still open, palm up and offering. His heart, Beto, how she heard it thudded, steady and strong. Not the frantic staccato of prey, but the measured rhythm of someone who had chosen. "Then let's risk it," he said. Gasps rippled through the hall. Some aliens recoiled in disbelief. Others scoffed, certain that within moments he would be a lifeless husk on the floor. But Serenith did not strike. She lingered, her cold fingers hovering just above his palm. For her, time stretched. She could feel the pulse of his life radiating like warmth against her skin, tempting and rich. It was not merely blood she hungered, for it was essence, vitality, the very spark of existence. To touch him was to risk losing control, to risk tearing down the careful walls she had built for centuries. And yet, slowly, inexorably, her hand descended into his. The contact was electric. Her skin was ice, his radiated heat. Together, they clashed like shadow and fire. The hall erupted with shocked murmurs, but Marcus did not look away. He closed his fingers around hers, gently but firmly, as though he were anchoring her to this moment. The ancient ritual stones beneath their feet flared to life once more. Where moments ago they had dimmed, resigned to her solitude. They now pulsed with light brighter, fiercer, as though the ancient magic itself had been waiting for this choice. A bond had formed where none should have. Seroneth inhaled sharply, her lips parting as warmth surged through her. For centuries, her existence had been cold, sustained only by the reluctant sacrifices of her subjects, her hunger dulled but never sated. But this was different. This was not stolen vitality. This was shared. The ritual itself poured energy into the connection, weaving threads of power between them that defied everything she had believed. Marcus's heartbeat pounded in her ears, louder than any drum. His blood called to her with a voice stronger than reason. Hunger rose in her throat like a tidal wave, ancient and unrelenting. Her fangs ached as they pressed against her lips. Every instinct screamed, "Feed, take, claim what is offered." Her crimson gaze locked on his neck. But Marcus impossibly smiled. Not with arrogance, not with ignorance, but with quiet certainty. "You offer yourself freely," she whispered, her voice trembling between awe and need. "If it means you don't stand alone," Marcus replied, And yes, her chest tightened. No one had ever spoken such words to her, not without fear, not without expectation of power in return. He asked nothing. He demanded nothing. He simply offered. The hunger clawed inside her, begging to be unleashed. Her fangs grazed the air between them, and she leaned closer, trembling with restraint. She could end him in a breath, drain him dry and be filled, if only for a fleeting moment. Every part of her knew this truth, but for the first time in her long reign, Saranth chose differently. Her hand tightened around his, not in violence but in desperate grounding. She closed her eyes, dragging the hunger back into its cage, forcing it to heal. The hall stared in disbelief. She resists, hissed a crystalline envoy. She denies herself, muttered a reptilian warlord. Impossible, another spat. But it was not impossible. It was happening before their eyes. Saranth opened her eyes again. Crimson softened by something rare, almost fragile resolve. She gazed at Marcus, not as predator to prey, but as sovereign to equal. He had given her a choice, and she had chosen not to devour him. Instead, she whispered in a voice only he could hear. "You do not know the storm you've invited, human." Marcus gave a small, wry grin. "Then let it come." The hunger roared inside her, but it was matched now by something even more dangerous, hope. And for the first time in centuries, Saranth allowed herself to believe she might not be destined to stand alone. The silence after Saranth clasped Marcus's hand lasted only a moment before it fractured like glass under a hammer. Outrage erupted across the great hall of Vareth. "This is heresy." A crystalline envoy cried, its body flashing with furious light. "The ritual is corrupted, defiled by her hunger," bellowed a reptilian warlord, his claws scraping across the crystalline floor. "Break the bond before she drains him dry," shrieked an insectoid monarch, its wings buzzing in panic. The chamber filled with chaos. Delegates surged to their feet, their voices rising in overlapping fury. Some demanded the ritual be undone, others shouted for Marcus's immediate removal, and more still called for Serena's execution on the spot. Marcus stood calm amidst the storm. His hands still entwined with the queen's, he didn't flinch at the threats. Didn't step back, even as a few armed guards took tentative strides toward them. His posture remained steady, his gaze fixed on Saranth's pale face. She, too, had not moved, but then her eyes ignited. A glow of molten crimson spilled across her irises, and power radiated from her like a wave. The air thickened, every being in the hall suddenly aware of the predator they had scorned. She released Marcus's hand only to raise her own in a commanding gesture, her silks flowing outward as if stirred by an unseen wind. Silence. The word wasn't shouted, didn't need to be. It cracked through the chamber like thunder, underpinned with a force that made hearts skip and lungs falter. One by one, the voices died. Even the guards froze in place, trembling as though invisible chains held them. Saranth rose taller, every inch the queen she was born to be. For centuries she had been dismissed, reduced to whispers of hunger and fear. Tonight, she shed that shadow. Her voice carried not just authority, but centuries of bitterness sharpened into steel. "You called me monster," she said, her tone resonant and unyielding. "You cast me aside, not because I am unworthy, but because you are afraid. You fear what you do not understand. You fear the hunger in my veins because it mirrors the hunger in your own hearts, the hunger for dominance, for survival, for control." Her words struck like blades. Delegates shifted uneasily, some lowering their gazes as though she had stripped them bare. And yet she continued, lifting her chin, "In all your vaunted courage, in all your claims of unity, not one among you dared approach. Not one among you offered your hand." She turned then, crimson eyes softening as they found Marcus. Except him. The hall stirred again, though no one dared speak loudly now. "He chose freely," Saranth declared, her voice swelling with power. "Where your sacred ritual faltered, he chose. Where destiny hesitated, he stepped forward. This bond is not corruption. It is truth. It is proof that courage lies not in the empires of the galaxy, but in a human who sees not monster, but equal. Her silks flared outward like wings of darkness, shadows rippling from her form as if the very air bent in deference. Marcus chose that moment to speak. His voice, though far less commanding than hers, carried a weight that silenced murmurs once more. "If your people call her a monster, then I stand with the monster," he said firmly. "Better to stand with one who is abandoned than with a galaxy that fears its own shadows." The words struck harder than any blade. Shock rippled through the crowd, outrage in some, unease in others. But within the silence that followed, something undeniable stirred. Doubt. Doubt in the certainty that the vampire queen was cursed. Doubt in the belief that the ritual was absolute. Saraneth turned back to Marcus. For the first time in centuries, her lips curved not into a cruel smirk, not into a mask of superiority, but into a faint, genuine smile. It was a small thing, almost fragile, but it carried the weight of eternity. "You speak boldly for one so fragile," she murmured. Her voice meant only for him. Marcus returned her gaze steadily. "Fragile things endure longer than they should. Ask the galaxy." A ripple of laughter, soft and incredulous, escaped Saraneth's lips like frost cracking under sunlight. The hall shuddered at the sound. For no one remembered the last time she had laughed. The guards who had begun their approach now hesitated. Glancing at their leaders, uncertain whether to advance or retreat, the ritual stones beneath Marcus and Saraneth pulsed steadily, casting a glow that bathed them both in light. It was undeniable. The bond had been sealed, and no decree of the Concord could undo it without breaking the sacred laws they themselves upheld. At last, Saraneth turned her gaze on the crowd once more. "Mark this night well," she commanded, her voice echoing like a prophecy. "For centuries you left me to stand alone, no longer. I am not bound by your fears, nor by your silence. I am bound now by choice, his choice. And that makes me stronger than I have ever been." The hall remained still, able to muster defiance against the queen, who had been reborn in their S. The chamber, once echoing with hushed whispers and veiled mockery, had fallen into silence after Marcus's defiant act of taking Queen Zithrus's hand. That single gesture, so small, so human, carried a weight that none of the gathered dignitaries could have foreseen, where others saw a creature draped in shadows. Marcus saw a woman burdened with exile, her crown heavy, not with power but with loneliness. He hadn't bowed or cowered before her. Instead, he had treated her with dignity, as an equal. And that made the galaxy tremble. The queen's awakening for centuries, Zithrus had lived as both sovereign and outcast. Her people's vampiric hunger had marked them as monsters in the eyes of other civilizations. They were predators, parasites, and liars, at least according to the propaganda whispered through council halls. She had grown accustomed to disdain, even to hatred. But Marcus's hand was warm. Not trembling, not forced, not calculating. Warm. Her crimson eyes locked onto his. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the queen's lips parted in something resembling a genuine smile. It was faint, careful, but undeniable. A predator's sneer softened into something almost human. "You dare," she whispered, her voice carrying through the chamber like velvet laced with steel. "I choose," Marcus answered simply, not releasing her hand. That declaration echoed louder than the grand speeches of empires. The rebellion of one-act gasps rippled through the chamber. Alien delegates recoiled, scandalized. How could a fragile human not only approach, but claim the most feared sovereign of the old worlds? To them, it was madness, perhaps even blasphemy. But to a human, choice mattered more than tradition, fear, or stigma. Where the galaxy saw danger, Marcus saw a chance for understanding. Where others recoiled from fangs, he saw a smile waiting to be returned. In that instant, a quiet rebellion sparked. Other neglected rulers, once shunned, watched with widened eyes. What if a single human's hand could undo centuries of isolation? The bond for Jed Sithoris tightened her grip slightly, testing him, her strength immense. Bones could have shattered with ease. But Marcus didn't flinch. His heartbeat raced, not from fear, but from resolve. She listened, feeling the steady rhythm beneath his skin, a sound she had long associated with prey. Yet with him, it was something different. He was not prey. He was not worshiper. He was not judge. He was partner. That realization settled within her. And for the first time since her ascension to the throne, she felt something dangerously close to hope. The world reacts. The council erupted in outrage. Voices clashed, threats thundered, accusations flew. Some called for Marcus's removal, others for his execution. A handful whispered that perhaps this was the beginning of something greater. But the queen silenced them all with a single command. Enough. Her voice, calm but laced with power, brought the hall to stillness. She rose, her long cloak of dark silk trailing like a living shadow, and addressed the assembly. For ages you have condemned me to solitude, feared me, hated me. You called me unworthy of alliance, of love, of kinship. And yet, she lifted Marcus's hand, displaying it like a trophy. This human sees what you cannot. He does not tremble. He does not recoil. He chooses. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the steady rhythm of Marcus's breathing. The new beginning when the council adjourned. History had already shifted. In the records of the galaxy, this moment would be remembered as the day. Of the human's hand, Marcus's act had not only restored dignity to a forgotten queen, but also shattered the unspoken hierarchy that placed fear above understanding. For the queen, this was more than politics. It was salvation. For Marcus, it was more than boldness. It was empathy. Together, they had rewritten a narrative that civilizations had enforced for centuries. As they departed the hall side by side, Zithris whispered so only he could hear, "Your kind confounds me, Marcus of Earth. Do you understand what you have done?" He smiled, his grip firm. "Yeah, I just refuse to let you be alone." And in that fragile moment, the galaxy learned why humanity was feared, respected, and most of all needed. Not for their strength, not for their weapons, but for their refusal to bow to fear. For their audacity to reach for what others rejected. The alien vampire queen had been neglected by all, until a human chose her, and that choice changed everything.